Good morning. It is a joy to see everyone today. So many smiling faces, smiling eyes. Just always good to be here. We're going to start off with our text for the morning, which is going to come from Amos. Oh, I didn't change my title slide. I saw depression pop up and I was like, that was last week's. But I didn't change my title slide, and I probably didn't change the last slide. Oh well, we'll figure it out. But I do have my text in there, I do know that. Amos chapter 5, verses 14 and 15, and then jumping over into Amos chapter 5, verses 21 through 24 will be our focus text for the day. We're also going to reference in Amos chapter 1, verse 2 here in a moment, but we'll get a little ways further into our lesson before we get to Amos chapter 1, verse 2. Amos chapter 5, verse 14. So if you have a Bible, I'm encouraging you to open to the book of Amos. If you don't, that's perfectly fine. That will be on the screen. But Amos is a prophet in the Old Testament, near toward the end of your Old Testament. So I hope you can find him. Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum. That's kind of where he's at. Amos chapter 5, verse 14. Seek good and not evil, that you may live, and so that the Lord, the God of hosts, will be with you, as you have said. Hate evil, love good, and establish justice in the gate. It may be that the Lord, the God of hosts, will be gracious to the remnant of Joseph. Jump down to verse 21 now. This is the prophet from God saying, I despise your feasts. I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer to me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. And the peace offerings of your fattened animals, I will not look upon them. Take away from me the noise of your songs. To the melody of your harps, I will not listen. But let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. The prophet of Amos. Those lines are fairly popular, particularly that last one, verse 24. If you know the I have a dream speech from Martin Luther King, that is a phrase that he uses in it. Matter of fact, he is probably most notable for that reference. Most people hear that phrase and they attribute it to the speech, I have a dream, but Dr. King was actually referencing Scripture when he quoted it. I come to the book of Amos and I read the text like verses 21 through 24, and I realize that the world that Amos is living in is a world very similar to a world like ours. The economy is thriving in Jerusalem. All the things are going pleasantly well. People have more money in their bank account than they knew what to do with in many ways. Things seem to be going well for most people. And boy, society, you would have thought things were going well. Matter of fact, everyone was going to church. People showed up on Sunday mornings. Actually, they're Sabbaths, they're Saturdays, but they showed up on Sunday mornings and they were ready for church. They showed up, they built beautiful church buildings. They did things that they thought were appropriate for God. They were focused upon the worship of God. And you read those verses where God says, I don't want to hear it. That makes me question then, what makes a good worship service? We're here today, we're dedicating this hour 15, hour 30, whatever it turns into be. We're dedicating this time out of our life with the desire, with the intention of creating a worship service that is pleasing to God. Oftentimes we get the priority confused. We focus on a priority of ourselves. We say, what do I want out of a worship service? What do I want to make this worship service seem like it's truly great? And if I ask that question to any of you, there's going to be a certain list of things that's going to come around what makes a good worship service? How many of you would say a great worship service happens from incredible songs that we sing? You can raise your hand if you want to. You don't have to. I'd say that songs are pretty important. Wouldn't you, Jim? Man, I think songs are pretty important. And if I want a great worship service, then I want great singing. And I want to sing songs that just make me feel inside. How many of us would turn and then would say the sermon? The sermon is the most important part of our worship service. I raised my hand to that. Kind of a big time for me, isn't it? You know? The sermon is most important. Matter of fact, in Barna, I forget which study it was and what year it was. It was within the last 5 years. Barna is a group that does a lot of statistics analysis, particularly focused on religious organizations and churches. And the number one reason that people will attend a church is because of the sermon. They hear a good preacher, and they say that is the number one drive for a person. I want to say the statistic was like 67% of people will attend a church. It was on the higher spectrum because they hear a good sermon. Man, I want a good sermon then. Probably not in luck for that today, are you? You know, the third thing that we might say is, I come to church because I experience people. I want to show up and I want to be with people that I know, smiling faces, friendly people, people who I love to be with. Oh man, the days that we have the potluck or the high tide Sundays when we sit at the tables and we get to look at each other and we get to talk with one another, aren't those wonderful days? How many of us, and this I'm going to raise my hand for you, how many of us come to a church because I feel that I like the people that I'm with, that I enjoy being around them, that I get to know them better, and that I feel a connection, a camaraderie with? Maybe I look at a worship service, and as Greg opened up the idea of our communion service, maybe I show up here today and that my entire worship service is focused on Holy Communion. That sacrament that we celebrate, maybe that's what makes a good worship service. But I want you to be reminded of what we read in the book of Amos. What was God's comment, and this I expect an answer from, what was God's comment to a people who were giving incredible songs? They were raising the roof with their praise. What was God's comment given to a people who loved to hang out with one another, who felt that church was a great communal fellowship time, who heard amazing sermons? I mean, like just the ones that make you feel good and the ones that convict you. What was God's comment to the people who were taking Holy Communion? I ain't going to have it. What else? I heard that one. What'd you say? I don't want to hear it. Who else? No one else wants it. I don't want to hear it. How in the world could our God reach a point where he says, I don't want to hear your songs? I don't want to hear them. I'm tired of you singing. I'm tired of you sacrificing. I'm tired of you showing up and doing all this stuff that you think's important. We ever thought of God as the one that says those things? That's Amos chapter 5, verse 21. God says, I hate. It's a strong word. Matter of fact, I don't like to use the word hate. I hate. I despise your feasts. I take no delight in your church service. Amos says on the behalf of God. What is wrong in this picture? Why is it that God is telling Amos to say that? But yet they're showing up every Sunday doing exactly what they thought they should do. Well, Amos gives us some insight to this. And the insight that he gives us really goes in this chapter. So if you're going to look back to even verse 1 of chapter 5 to our primary texts, but you could look through the entire book of Amos. And you can see that the problem in the book of Amos is that the church does not care for people. The church, I'll say that again, the church does not care for people. That's the problem. And let me define that a little bit. The people were selling each other into slavery, paying off debt, small debts. They were basically lowering the value of human life. You're only worth so much, so I'm going to sell you because it's a small debt and you're no longer worth the value. They were ignoring the poor, and they were using corrupt business practices to make the poor poorer. They were using business principles to make money for business, but they weren't caring about people. What we see is that the powerful people were preying upon the weak. They were using every tool that they had to make the poor suffer. And in the middle of all this, in the middle of this inequality, this injustice, the church sat by and celebrated. The reality is that God cares for everybody, does He not? He cares for the lowest of the economic status to the highest. There is a care and a concern on the behalf of God for everybody. This is Isaiah chapter 1. Isaiah, similar prophet to Amos. Isaiah 1 verse 17, learn to do good, seek justice. That was one of those beautiful words at verse 24. Let justice and righteousness flow like rivers. Seek justice. This is Isaiah 1 verse 17. Correct oppression. Bring justice to the fatherless and plead the widow's case. Isaiah gives us two particular groups of people that he says that are most damaged by a society that hurts people. That's first off the widows. I'm not going to ask for a raise of hands. You know who you are. The widows and the fatherless. I'm also not going to ask for a raise of hands. How many, though, have been adopted or who sit in children's homes in need? Notice the list of people who are seeking justice. And that's what Isaiah is called to. That is what he's calling a people to. Ezekiel does a similar thing in Ezekiel 22, verse 29. The people of the land have practiced extortion. They have taken advantage of other people. They are committing robbery, Ezekiel says. They have oppressed the poor. They've oppressed the needy. And they have extolled the immigrant that's among them without justice. Here we have the same group of people. The poor, the needy, the widows, the orphans, the immigrants. Our Old Testament is full of texts about people who are oppressed. And in the world that we live in today, I can't help but notice that maybe the message of Amos is a message that's just as applicable today. You see, the Old Testament goes through a listing of people who the world does not care about. In the Old Testament, I look to that person as only a means of exchange. The opportunity to better myself, the opportunity to make things better for me, for my business. And whatever it takes, whatever sacrifice has to come, so be it. You'll notice that in the life of Jesus, Jesus didn't spend his time ministering to a lot of wealthy individuals. Matter of fact, he made this comment that's quite interesting. He said that it's easier for a camel to go through what? Than for a rich man to enter into heaven. That's a troubling verse when I realize that all of us live in the top 1% of the world. That we all have a wealth that goes beyond our own understanding. So first off, I realize in the book of Amos that God cares for everybody. But I realize that God also speaks a word of judgment. This is Amos chapter 1, verse 2. Have you ever yelled at your kids? Anyone yell at their kids? Yes, there we go. I was waiting for the verbal to come out. What? Not today. And your kids are grown too. Why do you yell at your kids? And by the way, let's make a clarification here. There is a very real difference in a parent using a good, firm, stern voice and mental verbal abuse. We can agree to that. But I'm talking the good, stern voice that gets your attention, that says you better act right. We all, I hope if you have children, you have used that voice. Maybe even if you're like an aunt or an uncle or a niece or you've done that. Why do you do it though?
Because they're ignorant.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Because they're ignorant. They're doing something that needs to be different. And they don't know. And you've probably started with, now, little Johnny, we need to do this. Little Johnny, and then finally it turns into no, Johnny, do it now. God does the same thing in the book of Amos. Amos chapter 1 and verse 2. The Lord roars from Zion. Have you heard God roar? I imagine that to be a deafening sound, but it says, the Lord roars from Zion and utters his voice from Jerusalem. The pastures of the shepherd mourn, and the top of Carmel withers. That's Mount Carmel. As I look at the beginning of Amos, Amos is somewhat of a wealthy to-do shepherd. We believe at least that he owns everything that he pretty much talks about in the book. Amos would definitely be in a middle-class lifestyle. He lives a life that seems to be very well blessed in every account. And so as Amos is starting his book, verse 2, God roars from Zion. He is yelling to get the attention of his children. And as he is doing this, the book of Amos is focused on the injustice in the world that he sees within his own people, God's people. Now, we could list situations in our world that we see injustices are in. We could all list them, and they would all be different for each one of us because the things that we see are different than the things from each other. They're also different than the things of God. One of the things that I think would probably be a travesty within our society, and this one's going to be a hot button issue, because right now we're trying to push through tax cuts. I say we. I would say that collectively. We're looking for tax cuts. But yet, the tax cuts that may help feed hungry people. We talk about maybe even our church for a moment. We have a beautiful church facility, church property, church building. Have you ever heard of a conversation, and I'm not saying I've heard this recently so I can use it objectively, but have you ever heard of the conversation of, well, we have a beautiful building, so we don't want to abuse it. We don't want anything bad to happen to it by letting riffraff in, kids, let's say. Not pointing to kids, but we can point to any situation where we want to preserve our building more than let it be a use of service. This is one I read about on the news the other day that I have mixed feelings on. I just don't know where I sit on it. I'll confess that. The homeless camps in the downtown area where they are tearing the homeless camps apart. I say, man. But heaven forbid I let city government spend a little bit of money to figure out a problem or figure out a solution. It seems that politicians are also stuck in a place where they just don't know what to do. Because if you do one thing, there's someone mad at it. And if you do another thing, there's someone mad at it. And let's just be honest, we're all on all sides of the fence with about every issue possible. It doesn't matter what topic I could list on our list of oppressions or injustices, there's going to be someone on either side of the fence. The problems that we're talking about are not simple solutions. It's not like we can just snap our fingers and the problems are solved. These are big issues. But they're big issues because the church isn't taking a stand. The church isn't fighting for the rights of the people who are being hurt. I read this, and this was probably within the last year, talking about the children's homes and the children that are in foster care, the children that need adoption. And the comment was said that if every church in America took one child, we would no longer have a need for children's homes or foster care systems. That if every church took one child, the problems that we see in the world and the problems that we would want to complain about or the problems that we would want government to solve or find a solution for are problems that the church should be solving. The problems that we see in our society and in our world are problems that we should be solving. We stand behind our walls our buildings, our homes, our lives, our pocketbooks, and we desire for change, but we're not willing to open up our own selves to those changes. And that is why Amos chapter 5, verse 21, God says, I hate your feasts. I don't take delight in your church services. I don't like your burnt offerings. I don't like any of the things that you're doing. I don't like the fact that you show up on Sunday and proclaim my name when outside of these walls the life you live is very different. That's what Amos 5 is saying. God is saying, don't flood me with your worship if you're not going to flood me with your life. And for those of us who would want to look and say that that's an Old Testament problem, I think we can see the problems exist today. Solutions are no different or no easier. But they were alive in Jesus' day. If you remember the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus actually prayed this, or taught this in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 6. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Matthew 6 verse 33. Desire first and foremost the kingdom of God and desire his righteousness. The reality of justice and righteousness are just as prevalent in the days of Jesus as they were in the days of Amos, as they are in the days today. And so I realize that the problems that I see in the world are just as hard and troublesome as they were then, in Jesus' day, and today. And guess what? We haven't figured out a new solution to any of them. Because the solution involves me making a change in my life. So I'm preaching to myself just as much as I'm preaching to anybody else. Because I haven't opened up my own home. Maybe I haven't opened up my own pocketbook. The biggest thing with justice or injustice is that I have to realize that first and foremost, God's message of a kingdom, of a united church, of a world people, is not a message of us versus them. It's a message that God loves everybody. And in Amos's time, the prayers and the songs were being rejected because they weren't loving everybody. The problem was that their worship was focused inwardly, focused on what I want. What do I want my church to do? What do I want my church to do for me? What do I want my worship to look like? What do I want? And the problems of Amos's day slowly grew to where, they're the same place that our problems are they not? What do I want Okolona to look like? What do I want Okolona to do for me, for my family, for my children, for my parents? Maybe the primary goal of getting worship right's not about checking off the boxes of what I want. Maybe the primary goal of worship isn't about making this church look the way that I think this church should look. And maybe the primary goal isn't about me. But maybe the primary goal is about developing a heart for God that looks to people outside of these walls. The people that live in the apartment complexes down the road. The people that live in the neighborhood across the street here. The people that live in there's a street, I don't remember the street, but it's a street just kind of like right back over here on the other side of the trees. And looking to a people who don't look like me, who don't smell like me, who don't act like me, and who don't think like me, and saying that it is more than just me or even just us. That's the message that I want you to take home, and that God calls us to seek justice.
Or a better way of saying it maybe is get uncomfortable with it.
Is to get uncomfortable. Thank you. It's not just us that we should be trying to reach to. It's getting uncomfortable with people who aren't like us. Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Verse 24. God has His church in this world to bring peace to everyone. Unfortunately, I don't know if our churches are all doing that. But I do know a way that it can, and that's by us making the choice on an independent, individual level to do something. Dr. King, in his speech, when he quoted this verse, started a movement. He started the movement before this verse, but he started a movement that changed the world. I don't know what your passion is. I don't know what area you see that needs attention, ways that you can impact the world for good. But I do know this, that I could sit around all day long and talk about what I want for us. But that's not God's calling. God's calling is that I should strive to worship Him both inside this building with the praise that we give, with the sermons that we preach and the classes that we teach, and with all the stuff that we choose to do here, but that my worship is not acceptable in here if I'm not worshiping out there. So my challenge for all of us comes from our Bible verse for this month. Fear God, not just on Sunday mornings, and not just when it's convenient, but fear God and to serve Him faithfully. Because I know the great things that He's done. I know the great things He's capable of doing, the great things that He will accomplish. And when the outside of this building matches the inside of this building, I believe God will be pleased. I forget who has our application prayer this morning. Roger does. I'm going to go ahead and invite Roger up for that. My prayer, though, for all of us